So, a very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the IEA Midterm Gas Report 2025. I am Rohit Yadav from Business Development Team at Indian Gas Exchange, and I will be your host for today's session. On behalf of IGX, I would like to thank you all, the participants, for joining us today. The IEA report came at the right time as global markets are changing rapidly. These insights are very useful for India given its rising dependency on LNG imports and growing domestic demand. Understanding these dynamics is important, especially for the policymakers, market players, and industry stakeholders to work towards developing a competitive and transparent gas ecosystem. Today, we will discuss the IEA midterm gas report, which will offer a comprehensive midterm outlook on natural gas demand and supply globally. Before we begin the session, I would like to welcome all our esteemed speakers joining us today, starting with Mr. Rajesh Mediratta, MD and CEO, IGX. He has a rich experience of about 3.5 decades in energy sector and has been associated with IGX since its inception. It's been now more than 5 years. Ms. Carol and Ante, gas analyst IEA. She brings with her more than 2 decades of experience in the energy sector, including 3 years with IEA. Last but not the least, very well-known personality, Mr. Gregory Molnar, gas analyst IEA, who brings over 17 years of experience in the energy sector, including 7 years with IEA. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we start, I would request participants to please drop your questions in Q&A box. We'll take up those questions in Q&A session. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Rajesh Mediratta, sir, to deliver the opening remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rohit. And very good afternoon, everyone, and warm welcome to our webinar on IEA Medium Term Gas Report 2025. It's our pleasure to have with us Mrs. Carol Etienne and Gurgly Molna, gas analysts at IEA. Thank you both for joining us and for your continued support to the Indian gas market ecosystem. We deeply value our collaboration with IEA, whose extensive experience in global gas markets greatly support India's gas sector initiatives. A brief overview for those who are joining first time and they are new to IGX. IGX is basically a delivery-based electronic trading platform offering wide range of flexible contracts ranging from intraday to monthly, quarterly, half-yearly, available across 20 plus delivery points, ranging including LNG terminals, domestic gas fields, interconnection points. Today, IGX has 50 plus members and 200 plus clients. This year, we have traded more than 1.3 BCM so far, which is equivalent to 5.5 SCMD, or which is about 25% of spot markets or 3% of total India's consumption. Our benchmark price index, GIXI, reflects the domestic gas market fundamentals based on the actual demand and supply across regions. Since India relies heavily on global LNG, understanding global trends is important for us. With that, we look forward to hearing insights from Team IEA on the medium-term outlook, global supplies, demand trends, LNG markets, and their implications for India. A warm welcome once again to Ms. Carol Etienne and Gurgly Molna. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those insightful opening remarks, setting the perfect context for today's discussion. Now, I would like to invite experts from the IEA, Ms. Carol Ente and Ms. Greg Molnar, to begin the presentation. Please proceed, sir.
Dear Rohit, dear Rajesh, thank you so much for your kind words of introduction, and many thanks for hosting us today at the IGX. It is really a pleasure to join you together with my colleague Carol Etienne. Just a couple of weeks ago, at the end of October, we did publish at the agency our medium-term gas report. which provides an overview of recent market trends and an outlook to 2030. And the report is available free of charge on our website, iea.org. And today's presentation will be very much structured around the findings of that report. So first we will provide an overview of recent market trends. Then in the second part, we will give an overview of the medium-term outlook until 2030. And in the third part of the presentation, my colleague Kao Chen will give us a thorough overview and outlook for India's natural gas market. So I think that one way to take the pulse of natural gas markets is to look at the evolution of natural gas prices. And on this chart, we are presenting the evolution of European hub prices, represented by TTF as the dark blue line. And in light blue line, we have Platts JKM, which is a key marker for Asia. And the gray area between the two is the spread. I would like to make 3 comments related to natural gas prices. When we look at the first half of 2025, we see that both TTF and Asian spot energy prices traded well above their last year levels. TTF was up by almost 40%, and JKM was up by around 30%. In our view, this has been very much driven by the tighter supply fundamentals, and in addition, the geopolitical tensions provided additional upward pressure on gas prices, especially during the Middle East crisis in June. Now, if we look at the second half of the year, we see that easing is underway. Both TTF and JKM are trading well below their last year levels. And in Europe, the TTF prices actually dropped this week below the 30 euro per megawatt hours threshold, which translates into less than $10 per MMBTU. So what is driving this easing of fundamentals? In our view, this is very much due to the improving availability of global LNG supply. LNG production increased by more than 10% year on year since the start of July. And of course, this is softening market conditions both in Asia and in Europe. So in a way, 2025 seems to be a year of transition from the rather tight market fundamentals which emerged with Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the loosening of market conditions with the unfolding LNG wave. Now, let us have a closer look to the underlying supply fundamentals. On this chart, we are showing that global LNG supply increased quite strongly by more than 5% in the first 3 quarters of the year. And this translated into an increment of more than 20 BCM of LNG supply to the market. And as we can see, it has been very much driven by North America, and particularly by one important LNG facility in the United States, Plaquemines LNG in Louisiana, which alone accounted for about 65% of the incremental LNG supply in the first 3 quarters of the year. In addition to that, we see a continued increase in Russia's piped gas deliveries to China via the Power of Siberia pipeline system, which added about 6 BCM of additional gas to the Chinese market. Now, all of that growth has been partly offset by the lower piped gas deliveries to Europe from Russia after the halt of the transit via Ukraine, but also we have seen lower piped gas deliveries from Norway due to higher maintenance. And in addition to that, the storage injections in the European Union have been quite up significantly by around 35% year on year over the summer season in order to refill the storage sites. And this, of course, further tightened market conditions. Now, tighter supply fundamentals had also an impact on the demand side, and we clearly see a slowdown happening in 2025. On this chart, we are presenting the year-on-year change in natural gas demand across some of the key markets we are very closely monitoring in our gas report. And this includes, of course, Asia, Europe, North America, Eurasia, as well as Central and South America. And what is quite visible here is that after a rather strong increase in 2024, natural gas demand growth across these markets slowed down to just around 0.5% in the first 3 quarters of 2025. And actually, we can see that most of that growth is concentrated in Europe, where it increased by an estimated 5%, mainly due to weather conditions. We had a relatively cold Q1, and also renewable power output has been lower than expected due to slower wind speeds and reduced hydro availability. In contrast, when we are looking at the Asian markets, we see that demand has been rather subdued and even declined marginally in the first 3 quarters of the year. And this has been due to a combination of factors, including weaker macroeconomic fundamentals, but also relatively high spot energy prices and a relatively mild Q1 in Northeast China. We do think that this is a temporary slowdown, and we expect that global gas demand growth will return to a more rapid pace already in 2026. Now, of course, China was an important contributor and driver behind these market developments. China's LNG imports declined by around 17% in the first 3 quarters of the year. And here on this chart, we are showing the key drivers behind that decline. First of all, natural gas consumption in China was relatively flat, which is in sharp contrast with 2024, when the country's natural gas consumption increased by more than 6%. In addition to that, as already mentioned, we have seen the continued ramp up of Russia's pipe gas deliveries to the Chinese markets via the Power of Siberia pipeline system. And we have also seen a continued growth in China's domestic production, which increased by a strong 6%. So when we combine all these factors together, we see that LNG has been in a way squeezed out from China's primary gas supply mix. We do estimate that Chinese buyers nominated downward their procurements from the long-term contracts by around 10%, while spot procurements declined by more than 30%. And this, of course, allowed more LNG to flow to other markets, including to Europe. In Europe, we have seen really a contrasting image. I already mentioned that European natural gas demand increased by around 5%, and the storage injections were up by 35% year on year over the April to October period. In addition to that, we have seen lower piped gas deliveries to the European market from Russia, from Norway, but also from Azerbaijan. And this, of course, incentivized a strong increase in LNG imports, which increased by more than 25% to an all-time high of 127 BCM in the first 3 quarters of 2025. And on this chart, we can see that the United States played a crucial role in supplying those additional volumes to the European market. And this, of course, also allowed Europe to refill its storage sites to adequate levels. Now, I think it is also important to recognize that despite macroeconomic uncertainty and despite the temporary slowdown in natural gas demand, 2025 has been a very strong year for LNG project final investment decisions. In 2025, we have seen more than 90 BCM of LNG liquefaction capacity being sanctioned, which is the second best year in terms of LNG FIDs. I also would like to draw your attention on the very strong role of the United States in that picture. In the United States, we have seen more than 80 BCM of LNG liquefaction capacity reaching FID, which is an all-time high for the US gas industry. And this, of course, highlights the industry's confidence in the long-term growth of LNG demand, but also reflects the supportive policy and regulatory environment in the United States towards natural gas projects. And this strong increase in US LNG FIDs will reinforce, will solidify the role of the United States as the world's largest supplier of LNG for the coming decades. Now, another important factor to note is that when we look at LNG contracting activity, it has been also a very strong year. We have seen that after a rather slowdown in 2024, LNG contracting activity has been this year very much driven by North America, including the United States, which supports the development of these new projects. And when we are looking at the importing side, we see that the picture remains very much dominated by the portfolio players, large portfolio players, as well as Asian end buyers. In contrast, European buyers still account for less than 15% of the volumes contracted between 2024 and 2025. We continue to see long-term LNG contracts as the backbone for project development, and they are crucial to share the risk between sellers and buyers. Dear colleagues, please allow us now to move to the medium-term outlook. And really the starting point here is the LNG wave, which is unfolding as we speak. We expect that global LNG liquefaction capacity will increase by around 300 BCM per year between 2024 and 2030. And this strong increase is very much driven by the United States and Qatar, which together account for roughly 70% of incremental capacity. I also would like to highlight that more than 220 BCM of LNG capacity was sanctioned after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent reduction of Russia's pipe gas deliveries to Europe. So this strong LNG wave, which is unfolding as we speak, will be crucial to rebalance the global gas market, enhance energy supply security, and also improve the affordability of natural gas, including for price-sensitive Asian markets. So what will happen with all this LNG? This has been really one of the central questions we had when developing our medium-term outlook. And on this chart, we are trying to give a response to that question. The first bar shows the incremental LNG liquefaction capacity, which, as mentioned, is around 300 BCM per year. Now, we do need to apply some derating factors to that, including assumptions on ramp-up timelines, utilization rates, and we also included the potential LNG production reduction coming from legacy producers which are facing mounting feed gas supply issues. This is certainly the case for some of the legacy producers in North Africa and Southeast Asia. So after we did apply these derating factors, we see that global LNG supply would be around 250 BCM higher in 2030 than in 2024. So while the capacity is increasing by 300 BCM, the supply would increase by around 250 BCM, which is still a very strong increase, accounting for roughly for almost half of the current global LNG trade. Now, what is happening with the demand side? In our forecast, we have one static base case, which relies and reflects the potential demand trajectory under prices which are close to the current forward curve. And in that static base case, we expect that global LNG demand will increase by 170 BCM, with 3/4 of that growth coming from the Asian markets. In addition to that, we expect that LNG use as a maritime fuel will also expand quite strongly by around 15 BCM, partly because of the expansion of the LNG carrier fleet, but also because we see that LNG is increasingly a favored fuel by the operators of commercial vessels. So when we put together these categories, we still see that this is not sufficient to absorb all the LNG which is coming to the market. And we could have a surplus of 65 BCM of LNG by the end of the decade. And this leads naturally to the more dynamic high case. This case is constructed under the assumption that this surplus will provide downward pressure on natural gas prices and assumes that Asian and European LNG spot prices will start to converge towards the range of the short-run marginal cost of US LNG starting from 2027. This will be a gradual convergence. And of course, these lower spot LNG prices would foster additional demand, especially in the price-sensitive Asian markets, and will be sufficient to absorb the 65 BCM surplus and as such balance out the market. So how does the global gas demand picture looks like? On this chart, we are giving some historic perspective also. The first bar shows the evolution of global gas demand between 2018 and 2024, when global gas consumption growth slowed down to just around 1.4% from the historic 2%. And this has been, of course, not an easy period for natural gas markets. We had in 2020 the COVID lockdowns, and then in 2022-23 the gas supply shock induced by Russia, which of course also had negative repercussions on global gas demand growth. Now, when we are looking at the medium term, we expect that global gas demand would expand between 9 to 10%. and the Asia Pacific region alone would account half of the incremental demand. This will be, of course, supported by expanding economic activity, coal to gas switching dynamics in the power and industrial sectors, as well as rising population and better energy access. The second largest contributor is the Middle East, where we see the most important driving force being the oil to gas switching dynamics in the power sector, especially in Saudi Arabia. But another important driver is the region's gas intensive industrial base, which is expanding strongly over the medium term. In North America, we expect natural gas demand to continue to grow and to expand by around 5%. And here it is mainly driven by the electricity sector, the power demand, which itself is driven by the electricity-hungry data centers. Another contributor to North American gas demand growth is the energy sector, where we see additional demand coming from the region's rapidly expanding LNG liquefaction fleet. We also see continued demand growth coming from the gas-rich markets of Eurasia, Africa, as well as Central and South America. Really, the exception is Europe. In Europe, we expect that natural gas demand will decline between 8 to 10%, primarily because of the lower gas use in the power sector. We expect that in Europe, renewable power generation will increase by 40%, which will depress the use of natural gas by around 25% in the power sector. Now, while we use less natural gas in the power sector, the balancing role of gas-fired power plants will become increasingly important because we have a greater share of weather-dependent variable renewables at a time when coal-based generation is gradually phased out. So the role of natural gas in ensuring electricity supply security in Europe will actually increase over the medium term. And the second reflection I would like to make on Europe is that while natural gas demand is expected to decline, we also foresee that the region's LNG imports will increase by around 25% between 2024 and 2030. And this is mainly because we expect lower pipe gas volumes flowing into the European market from Russia, from Norway, as well as from North Africa. Dear colleagues, I think that one important point is to put the unfolding LNG wave into a broader perspective. We often hear that the coming LNG wave is unprecedented. It is half of the current global LNG trade. But I also would like to draw your attention to the fact that the incremental LNG supply would account for just 7% of Asia's current thermal coal demand. And this highlights also the challenge to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in that part of the world. But we expect that the unfolding LNG wave will contribute very strongly to coal to gas switching dynamics in Asia. Actually, we expect that coal to gas switching alone will account for about 45% of the additional gas demand under the high case. So it will be crucial to balance out the market and will also contribute to lower emissions and improving air quality in the Asian markets. Now, we also expect that the global LNG market will gain in terms of liquidity and in terms of pricing diversity. We expect that by the end of the decade, the share of destination flexible LNG contracts will increase to just over half of the contracted volumes. This is up from 30% back in 2016. And of course, this trend is very much supported by the United States, where the contracts are usually underpinned by destination flexibility. A second important trend we see is the growing role of portfolio players. We expect that their share in the total procurement contracts will increase to around 45%, up from just 26% back in 2016. And of course, portfolio players contribute very strongly to the growing liquidity of the LNG market by providing flexibility to the smaller end users. Last but not least, when we are looking at pricing of LNG, we see a greater diversity. We expect that oil-indexed LNG contracts will account for less than half of the total contracted volumes by the end of the decade, at the expense of hub-based contracts and hybrid pricing formulas. So the market is moving towards greater liquidity, more flexibility, and improved tradability. And this will, of course, support greater supply security, and also means that the LNG market will become more responsive, more reactive to the short-term supply-demand changes in various regions across the world. Well, last but not least, let us say a couple of words on low-emission gases. Low-emission gases are expected to expand quite strongly over the medium term. We foresee that their supply will increase by more than 2.5 times between 2024 and 2030. And this growth is very much supported by Europe and North America, accounting for roughly 70% of their incremental supply. And as you can see, the growth is mainly driven by biomethane and low emissions hydrogen, although we see also some potential for e-methane towards the very end of the decade. In particular, biomethane is expected to more than double by 2030. And this is certainly very much driven by the traditional markets such as Europe and North America, but we also see very strong potential in India as well as in Brazil due to the increasingly supportive policy and regulatory frameworks. Now, I would like also to put this increase into perspective. While it is certainly a rapid growth, still by 2030, the share of low-emission gases in the total supply of gaseous fuels will remain under 1%. And as such, their impact on the global gas balance will remain quite limited. Now, this being said, it is an important space to watch, and we are closely monitoring its developments at the International Energy Agency. And now, with that, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Carole Etienne, who will give us an in-depth review of one of the most exciting gas markets in the world, which is, of course, India. Carole, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gergely, for that comprehensive overview. I will now turn to the Indian gas market. It's a pleasure to be here today and to share the key findings from our analysis on how natural gas is evolving in India, especially at such a pivotal moment for the country's gas sector. Move to the next slide, please. So let's begin with a bit of background on how the Indian gas market has evolved over the past decade and a half. Until around 2011, India experienced a brief but significant domestic gas production boom, which led to a rapid rise in demand. But this momentum proved short-lived, and production declined sharply, and demand followed, falling for several consecutive years. A slow recovery began around 2015, though it was repeatedly disrupted, first by the COVID-19 pandemic and then by the 2022 global energy crisis, both of which led to sudden sharp drops in consumption. And as a result, after more than a decade of boom and bust cycles, India's total gas consumption in 2023 was still only slightly higher than it had been in 2011. But the past 2 years marked a turning point. In 2023 and 2024, gas demand grew by double digits, a pace India had not seen since the early production boom. And we see this surge as an inflection point, positioning the country for a period of strong and sustained growth through 2030. And there are three key forces that are driving this shift. First, the rapid build-out of infrastructure, which is easing long-standing bottlenecks. The second is a steady growth in domestic production, which is generally cheaper and more stable than imported LNG. And third, the wave of new liquefaction capacity, as mentioned by Gergely, which is already underway and which should help lower LNG prices and improve affordability over the rest of the decade. So taken together, these elements create a much more favorable environment for gas demand growth that India has had in many years. Next slide, please. So despite this momentum, 2025 has brought a temporary pause. Consumption had been declining year on year since August 2024 and continued to fall through August 2025. And over the first 8 months of this year, demand was about 6% lower than the same period last year. The decline was concentrated in power generation, refining, and fertilizers. In the power sector, demand is normalizing after the exceptional heatwave-driven spike of 2024. And in oil refining and fertilizers, relative higher LNG prices made LPG and naphtha more economical alternatives. However, not all segments are slowing. City gas demand remains robust, up almost 9% year on year, thanks to the ongoing network expansion and the growth in CNG vehicles. And because demand is falling faster than domestic production, which was down around 3% year on year for the first 8 months of 2025, LNG imports have dropped sharply by nearly 10% for the first 8 months of this year. And for the entire year 2025, we expect total gas consumption to decline by about 3% compared to 2024. But there are early signs of stabilization. PPAC data for September 2025 shows that demand is returning to positive trajectory. And looking ahead, we expect a recovery in 2026 with consumption rising by around 7% year on year, supported by the expansion of city gas networks, the continued growth in the number of CNG stations and vehicles, the rising in industry use, and the increasing use in electricity needs for peak demand, for instance. Next slide, please. And the infrastructure has been one of the major barriers in the past to gas development in India. So for years, even latent demand could not be translated into actual consumption due to the insufficient density and reliability of pipeline networks. But this picture has changed remarkably in recent years, and infrastructure development has accelerated and is now one of the strongest drivers of demand. The figures you see on this chart come from our India gas market report we published in February 2025, and it reflects the situation in 2024 in light blue, and you'll see that progress has already continued since then. And since 2019, the transmission grid has expanded by more than 40%, reaching 24,000 kilometers today. The residential and commercial PNG connections have more than doubled, reaching 15.7 million in 2025, and the number of CNG stations has nearly quadrupled to around 8,300 today. And looking ahead to 2030, we expect that the transmission grid to grow by another 50%, and both CNG stations and PNG connections to nearly double again. And with the right policy support, this pace could accelerate even further, improving infrastructure utilization rate and helping India build a more resilient and efficient gas system. Next slide, please. So our forecast suggests that India's gas consumption could rise from about 72 BCM in 2024 to almost 107 BCM in 2030, which is an increase of nearly 60%. And most of this growth comes from three key sectors. First, the city gas distribution, which remains the anchor of demand growth thanks to expanded connection and continued conversion to CNG vehicles. The second is the manufacturing and heavy industries, where gas supports both energy needs and emission reductions. And the third one is power generation, particularly the use of flexible gas-fired capacity to provide reliability for the electricity system and support the impressive development of renewable energy sources in India. So the refining sector will also contribute as more refineries gain pipeline access. But in contrast, the outlook for petrochemicals and fertilizers is limited until 2030 due to the lack of new projects to increase gas-based capacity. Next slide, please. And with targeted policy measures, total demand could grow even further and reach around 120 BCM by 2030, roughly 15 BCM above our reference case. And the additional growth would come from a higher utilization of stranded gas-fired power plants, despite the fact that some units have already been retired and it will be challenging to restart others. It would come from a faster adoption of LNG in heavy-duty transport, especially in long-haul trucking and mining. It will also come from a rapid expansion of city gas networks beyond pure plants, and the full replacement of LPG with natural gas in commercial applications, which would bring both economic and environmental benefits. So realizing this additional demand will depend on coherent and sustained policy support, which can play a decisive role in enabling these opportunities. Next slide, please. So On the supply side, domestic gas production is expected to grow, but much more slowly than the demand. So after nearly a decade of stagnation, production rebounded strongly after 2022 due to the ramp up of three deepwater fields in the Krishna-Godavari basin, which was a major boost for India's upstream sector. However, this ramp up was largely complete by 2024. And from now until 2030, only a handful of smaller coal bed methane developments and discovered small fields are expected to add new supply. And meanwhile, output from existing deepwater assets and other legacy fields is set to decline. So as a result, domestic production in 2030 is expected to reach just under 38 BCM, which is only about 5% above 2024 levels. And the widening gap between the supply and the demand will need to be met increasingly by LNG. Next slide, please. And when it comes to domestic production, can we move to the next slide, please? When it comes to domestic production, compressed biogas presents also a promising opportunity for India, given the country's large agricultural base and plentiful organic waste streams. Of course, the volumes in play are limited, but this is a strategic prediction. And we have identified in our report several challenges that need to be addressed. The land costs remain high in many regions. The feedstock supply is uneven throughout the year and across the country. And marketing both CBG and digestate, which is its liquid byproduct, remains challenging, even though digestate has value as an organic fertilizer. So to support the sector, the government has introduced a mandatory CBG blending requirement for CNG and PNG in the coming years, with 1% obligation for the fiscal year 25-26, ramping up to 5% by the fiscal year 2028-29. And with these policies, we expect CBG production to rise from almost zero today to just under 1 BCM by 2030. And stronger measures such as improved land access, clearer digested standards, or guaranteed offtake agreements could unlock faster growth, and we discuss these in detail in the report. We'll move to the next slide, please. You can move to the slide dedicated to LNG, please.
Yes, it appears to be on my screen. Is it not the case?
No, it's not.
Apologies for that. Is this better?
No.
Not yet.
You may like to unshare and then share.
I think there is some connectivity issue at his end. Carol, can you share your presentation?
Yeah, just let me. I hope you can see the slide on LNG demand now.
Yes.
Sorry, sorry for this stop in the presentation, but let's move now to LNG imports. And before we continue, a quick note on the data. This projection was based on 2024 figures, which expected LNG imports to increase in 2025. But preliminary data, however, showed that LNG imports actually fell by almost 10% year-on-year this year compared to last year. So even so, with demand growing faster than domestic production, we expect that LNG imports will need to more than double.
Participants, sorry for the inconvenience. The speakers are again joining. Please wait for 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, it seems that we are experiencing some connectivity issues. Our most sincere apologies for that inconvenience. Please allow me to try to reshare my screen.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. And I hope that Kahol will reconnect in a minute. Please allow me to check
No
this
issues. No issues.
with her. Dear colleagues, Kahol will be reconnecting and will be with us in a minute. Our apologies for that inconvenience.
Apologies for this temporary pause. I don't know exactly where the connection stopped.
This is a slide.
Ka-
Yes.
Carol,
For
it is
LNG
very
demand.
good to you that you are back with us. I think that it was the last slide we have seen
Yes.
without an interruption. So maybe if you could elaborate on that and
Yeah, sure.
thank you.
So I was saying that on the LNG import side now, we see that our prediction is based on 2024 figures that you can see on the deep blue here. So it is expected it was expected in 2024 to increase this year in 25, but the actual data that we have has shown that energy imports actually fell by almost 10% year on year. So even so, with demand growing faster than domestic production in the country, we expect that LNG imports will need to more than double by 2030, reaching around 65 BCM. And this has two major implications. The first one is that India would require additional LNG import capacity toward the end of the decade to avoid overloading existing terminals. And then, if you can move to the next slide, we see that legacy LNG contracts are expiring, and India is facing a widening gap between contracted supply and projected requirements, especially after 2028. So without new long-term agreements or renewals, India will be increasingly exposed to spot market volatility, which has historically been pronounced and could pose risks to both affordability and energy security. So strengthening long-term contracting will be an important part of maintaining supply stability. And this is something Indian LNG buyers are actively considering and working on. For example, in 2024, Petronet LNG extended its existing supply deal with Qatar Energies for about 10 BCM per year until 2048. This way, securing continued LNG volumes under long-term agreements. And more recently, to name just one example, in February 2025, Indian Oil signed a 14-year LNG supply contract with ADNOC, covering up to 1.6 BCM per year. And this demonstrates that Indian buyers are actively securing long-term supplies. This leads to my last slide. And as you have understood, policy reform is essential to increase the share of gas in India's energy mix. In our report, we have listed a number of policy recommendations across 7 key areas, which are shown here, and that the government could consider to achieve this. Key priorities include accelerating infrastructure development and last-mile connectivity, supporting domestic production, improving market incentives, and aligning regulation and taxes to ensure that natural gas remains competitive with alternative fuels. Together, these steps would strengthen energy security, support industrial growth, and help India meet its environmental goals. With that, I will conclude my presentation on India, and I will now hand over to Gergely for his conclusion remarks.
Thank you, Carol, for this wonderful overview of India's gas market and outlook for India. Dear colleagues, please allow us to conclude with a few key takeaways. When we look back to 2025, we see that it is really a year of transition from the rather tight market conditions which emerged after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine to easing of the market environment due to the LNG wave, which is already unfolding. We see quite a strong increase in global energy production in the second half of the year, with global LNG output up by more than 10% year on year since the start of July. And of course, this is softening market conditions both in Asia and in Europe. When looking at the medium term, we do expect that global LNG liquefaction capacity will expand by 300 BCM by the end of the decade. And this LNG wave is primarily driven by the United States and Qatar. This comes in the context of rather tight fundamentals after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And as such, we see that this new LNG wave will be instrumental to ease market fundamentals, enhance energy supply security, and also improve the affordability of natural gas, including for the more price-sensitive Asian markets. When we look at the global gas demand picture, we expect that it will actually accelerate over the medium term. We expect that global gas consumption will expand by around 10% under the high case trajectory in our forecast. We do expect that lower natural gas prices will foster additional gas demand growth, and Asia alone would account for half of the incremental gas demand. Now, of course, India will be an important contributor to that. After the pause in 2025, India's natural gas demand is expected to increase sharply by 2030, driven by a combination of factors, including economic growth, gas infrastructure development, and more favorable market conditions. We also expect that the global LNG market will gain in terms of liquidity and pricing diversity. And this is very reflected by the changing contractual structures. Our internal contract database indicates that the share of destination-free and hub-indexed LNG contracts would increase to just over half of the contracted volumes by 2030. And of course, this will enhance the flexibility and the liquidity of the global LNG market. We keep also a close eye on the development related to low emission gases, which in our view includes biomethane, low emissions hydrogen, and e-methane. And here we expect that they will continue to grow at a rapid pace, with their supply increasing by more than 2.5 times by 2030. Still, their share in the total supply of gaseous fuels will remain limited at just around 1%, and as such, their impact on the global gas balance will remain limited over the medium term, but still it is an important space to watch. Dear colleagues, we would like to thank you for your kind attention, and we would like to sincerely apologize for the technical issues which emerged during the presentation. So we would like to thank you for your attention and looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Greg and Ms. Carol, for that insightful and comprehensive presentation. We have now reached the more interactive segment of our webinar, the Q&A session. We have already received a few questions and we will try to address as many as possible within the time we have. So we will take the first question now. The first question is, what are the projected gas prices from 2026 onward?
This is indeed a very good and important question. At the International Energy Agency, we don't provide price forecasts. The analytical framework underpinning the medium-term forecast is structured around two cases. One case, which we call the static base case, relies on natural gas prices informed by the current forward curve. And in the more dynamic high case, we assume that Asian and European spot LNG prices could start to converge towards the range of the short-run cost of US LNG starting from 2027. That would be a gradual convergence, and it would be quite critical to foster additional natural gas demand growth, especially in the Asian markets. So this is a broad response, but maybe just also to give you some numbers for the 2025-2030 period under the second case, so the high case. Our assumption is that Asian prices would average at $8.5 per MMBTU. So that's significantly lower than during the previous years. And again, this is an average for that 5-year period between 2025 and 2030. There will be, of course, fluctuations in between the years.
Thank you. The next question is, India aims to reach 15% of gas in its energy mix by 2030. What are the key steps needed to reach this goal?
I guess this question is for me because it deals with India more specifically. So as we mentioned in our report, so not the one published recently on the global gas market, but the one dedicated to the forecast until 2030 for India, which was published at the Indian Energy Weeks in February 2025. We see that policy support is very important. We have seen, as I said during my presentation, I hope it wasn't cut because of the technical shutdown, but we've seen major efforts in India to develop the infrastructure, and this is a major step in improving access to gas for the different customers. But we see that there is also a need to support gas compared to other alternative fuels. So depending on the sector, on the sectors you are referring to, it can be different fuels. But for instance, we see a great advantage of gas power generation in the energy mix because it can support the rapid expansion of renewables. But of course, the competition with cheap coal in India makes it not affordable right now. So in order to bring gas back into the merit order to produce power, there would be a need to have the same taxes for the different fuels, but also maybe to put in place a kind of carbon price mechanism that could bring gas back into the merit order. And for some others, other sectors, I think taxes between the different provinces, states in India is also important to support affordability for gas in order to increase its share in the Indian energy mix.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Actually, this question requires a separate full day discussion. And as probably you would have seen, there is a report, expert committee report, which actually talks about the same thing, like how the expansion of demand will happen in India and the Vision 2040, what measures we need to take. So maybe we can do a separate webinar, getting your perspective. And as you have just shown the table, which is part of your report issued in early this year in India Energy Week. So probably we can do a webinar which talks more on this and also on the gas market enabler, what you said about GST and other infrastructure. Besides that, what we need to do for making markets more liquid. So that will be a topic for a separate webinar. We definitely would like to do.
Indeed, this is an important and major discussion. So we will be pleased to take part of this future webinar, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. The next question is, how will rising LNG prices affect India's price-sensitive demand? And is a 110 BCM outlook realistic?
So I will start answering the question, and Gege, if you have any additional comments, please feel free to interact. So, of course, we were optimistic in our report because we see the conditions in India are now the base for increased share of gas in the energy mix. So maybe the 107 BCM won't be the reality. That's how forecast lives. It will be a bit less, a bit more. I don't know exactly now because of such uncertainties that will appear between now and 2030. But for sure, the trend will be here, and we see a major potential for LNG imports increase in the years to come in India because of the development of LNG import capacities, but also connected to the transmission grid and to the distribution network to reach final end users. With the easing of the prices on the LNG side, we think that it is the beginning of a new era for importing and buyer countries, and with the huge needs of India because of the growing population, the needs to access to energy. We think that it is the right moment for LNG to increase. Okay, I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Thank you, Carol. Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, with a global LNG surplus, how viable in is India's domestic LNG production or bio LNG production and CBM gas, and what energy security risk should India watch as a major importer?
So, of course, domestic production is important for important countries, and the more you produce, the less you need to import. And as I've shown during my presentation, we expect the domestic production in India to reach a plateau, and we don't see a major increase by 2030. But we see a huge potential for CBG, even though the volumes will be quite limited. It is important to develop this market because it is a domestic production. Of course, the production in India will be important, but as demand is growing much more faster than the domestic production, LNG imports will increase significantly in the years to come.
Carol, I got a again related question because the global outlook is also that what Greg told us that the biomethane production is going to increase by 2.5 times. And given that our LNG prices are going to come down over, say, next 2 to 3 years, would it not impact the biomethane production? Because normally biomethane is much costlier. And I would also, if you can share that, what is the average price for biomethane in Europe? Because in India, we see it's quite high. And actually, this CBG, what we call as CBG, that production is not getting accelerated because it needs a kind of some subsidy from the government or some mechanism of obligation. Otherwise, it doesn't survive on its own. So, what is the scenario in Europe on the in terms of price for bio LNG and biogas, biomethane? And will it not impact the outlook for biomethane production? As you said, it will increase by 2.5 times.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Madirata. That's an excellent question. So I think that what is important to note that the upscale of low emission gases and then the potential derivatives from it are not driven purely by economic fundamentals. They are really driven by policy targets and the subsequent regulatory frameworks. As such, our projections in that case are really based on the projects which have been already approved or where we see that the investments have been allocated. So, and I mean, they are supported by a wide range of support mechanisms and subsidy schemes, which can, be either feed-in tariffs or support received from auctions and so on. But those are, when we compare the cost of production for biomethane, it is certainly not competitive with the prices of natural gas even today. So just to maybe give us an idea, I think in Europe, the cost of biomethane production, but please don't quote me on that because it varies greatly. It varies greatly
Okay.
from one facility to another. But I think that if we say that it is around $20 or $25 per MMBTU, that's not unreasonable. So it is, maybe 2 or 3 times higher than the current gas prices in Europe. So, I mean, from a purely economic perspective, it would not survive. But of course, the low emission gases, they can play a very important role in decarbonizing the future gas supply and to reduce the emission intensity of the energy supply of the broader energy system. So it is important to support them. But yes, just in terms of the economics, there is still a long way to go to make them competitive with traditional natural gas supply.
One more related question that was on biomethane. Do you also have in Europe a compliance mechanism like obligation created for biomethane, and then the consumers and industries are required to meet certain obligation, and for that, by that means you can actually push for biomethane consumption. Is that mechanism there anywhere in Europe?
So I think that the European Commission has a target which is non-binding, legally non-binding target of 35 BCM of biomethane output by 2030. I think that it would be quite challenging to reach that target at this point. But again, this is legally not binding. Now, if there is any blending targets.
Yeah, blending obligation.
If there is, I think that it is considered in the Netherlands, and I do think, and Carol, please correct me, but I do think that in France, in the pluri-annual energy plan, there are some targets related to the share of biomethane in the total gas transmitted via the pipeline system. But Carol, maybe you want to comment on that latter point.
Yeah, just to mention that there may be a slight difference between the European approach and Indian. But in Europe, there is no blending obligation for every customers, but instead there is a target to inject biogas or biomethane into the grid, and this way, once it is blended, there is no way to track each and every molecule of biomethane that will reach the end user, but instead it's part of the gas.
Mandate, yeah, general mandate to the governments.
No, not exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have next question. Do you see any restoration of Suez Canal movement impacting the LNG shipping industry? And your views on the development of Power of Siberia 2 affecting the LNG supply globally?
Can divide this question between the two of us, Carol, if that's convenient for you to take the Suez question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So what we see that the transit via the Red Sea has almost stopped since 2022. But we haven't seen any major impact on prices for LNG charter rates. This is because we are entering a period of over capacity for LNG tankers. So there are some swaps, contractual swaps that optimize the shipping, and there is no disruption caused by these stop of transit via the Red Sea. And instead, there are alternative routes that are being used by operators, and for now anyway, and for the next coming years, we don't see any major impact on this on the shipping side.
Thank you, Carol. And in respect of Power Siberia 2, of course, this project has been under discussion between Russia and China for more than a decade now. And I think that the most recent announcements were related to memorandum of understanding, which has been signed in earlier this year in Beijing. At the same time, there's still it seems that there are many points on which an agreement still needs to be reached, including the pricing formula, the flexibility related to the volumes, so the take or pay commitment, and also the financing structure and the potential involvement of China in the financing of the project. So there is still several question marks which are open, and our understanding is that negotiations do continue between the two parties. So in that respect, Gazprom and CNPC. There haven't been any announcements related to that pipeline project in the latest St. Petersburg forum in Russia, which is a major economic forum for the country, and in which usually announcements are made on such important projects, but there haven't been any announcement this year. So I think that it is also important to know that even if a legally binding supply contract is signed, which is needed in order to proceed with the construction of the pipeline system, it would still take at least 5 years to build up that pipeline system, which would be more than 3,000 kilometers of length, and the ramp up of the volumes up to the 50 BCM, which is under discussion, would also take several years. So if this product goes ahead, it will certainly have an impact on the market, but probably in the second half of the 2030s. And in a way, it could prolong the loosened market conditions into the second half of the 2030s. But it would also potentially create some stronger reliance on Russia for China, which might be also an important political consideration for the Chinese party, whether they would like to have such reliance, or maybe they would like to have a more balanced mix of natural gas imports.
Thank you for answering that. We have one more question. We will take this last question. Coal remains the dominant source of power generation in India. Can LNG prices realistically fall to $5 to $6 by 2030 to make a shift from coal to gas?
So in our report, we have highlighted the potential for production of electricity from natural gas, because we think that it could bring several advantages. The first one would be the air quality in cities, which is a major problem in India currently. It would contribute to decarbonize the global energy mix, and we also think that it could contribute to balance the electricity system with the increasing share of renewables in the power energy mix in India. So, of course, this is a challenging conception, because gas prices will need to decline sharply to compete with coal. But once again, what I suggested before is that a carbon prices mechanism, if putting in place in a way that it's revenue neutral and there is no increase in the final price for the end user, it could bring gas back in the merit order, and it could again compete with coal, which is not the case right now. So this would need some changes in support mechanisms, but this is not something that should be overlooked, because it is important to this is an important growing sector we see for natural gas as well.
Yes, thank you. Sir, can we take more questions, or?
I think we should close. Probably they may have engagements.
Yes.
So we should close now.
Okay, sir. So thank you all the speakers for your insightful answers. The depth of your knowledge has truly enriched our understanding of the gas market. So as we approach the end of our webinar, I would like to thank our speakers for their excellent presentations and engaging sessions. A big thank you to our audience for your active participation, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Carol. It's great again. So we shall meet again. And of course, in between, we will plan something which is on the market side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
It
for
was a
having
pleasure
us.
for
Thank
us.
you.
Thank
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.